We want to talk about this concept called the Cosmic Jubilee, or Cosmic Shmitot, sabbaticals, a cosmic cycle, a 50,000-year cycle of sabbaticals that the whole universe follows, or at least life on Earth, civilization on Earth follows this cycle, a pattern of 7,000 years times 7 times, totaling 49,000, and then the 50th year is a Jubilee. You've heard this idea before of the Cosmic Jubilee? So it's the perfect time to talk about it because it's actually this week's Parsha. It's right at the beginning of this week's Parsha, so it's the ideal time to talk about it. And it's Sfirat HaOmer. It's building off of what we said last time of this period between Passover and Shavuot, of counting the 49 days between Passover and Shavuot, and the 50th day is Shavuot, which is like the Jubilee when the Torah was given. And so then there's like this grand cosmic cycle of civilization of 50,000 years. And if we can understand this very deeply profound, Kabbalistic, mystical secret, if we can understand it, then it's actually going to help us understand so many other things that we see in the world today, and especially what archaeologists have found and various scientific discoveries. You've probably heard in recent years various people have spoken about, ancient civilizations, pre-human civilizations, trying to explain the mystery of the pyramids and the Sphinx and all kinds of mega structures all over the world and ancient cities that are many thousands of years old. You've heard of this stuff? The Younger Dryas period, various hypotheses about how life on Earth has changed, ice ages and things like that. So we can actually explain all of that from a Torah perspective very neatly and very carefully. It's amazing that what people are discovering now, what scientists and historians and archaeologists are discovering now, our sages already spoke about centuries ago in great detail. So that's what we want to try to piece together tonight. Where does it come from? We're going to start with the actual Torah source for it. Okay, so it's in Sefer Vayikra, it's in this week's Parsha, Parashat Behar, Leviticus chapter 25. How does it start? Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe behar Sinai le'emor. God spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai. Daber el bnei Yisrael ve'amarta alehem ki tavo el haaretz asher ani noten lachem. When you come into the land that I give you, ve'shavta haaretz Shabbat le'Hashem. And the land has to lie fallow, and the land should keep a Sabbath to God. The land itself has to keep a Shabbat. Shesh shanim tizra sadecha. 6 years you have to sow and plant your fields. V'shesh shanim tizmor karmecha ve'asafta et tevuata. And for 6 years you will harvest your yields. Uveshana shvi'it, and the 7th year, Shabbat Shabbaton yeh la'aretz. There will be a Sabbath for the land. Shabbat le'Hashem, a Sabbath for God. Sadcha lo tizra ve'karmecha lo tizmor. So you should not reap or sow in the 7th year. We know that. That's the Shemitah. The 7th year is called the Shemitah, the sabbatical, the 7th year sabbatical. Later on, the Torah continues and says, you have to repeat this 7 times. V'safarta lecha sheva shabbatot shanim. You should count for yourself 7 weeks of years. Sheva shanim, sheva pa'amim. 7 years, 7 times. V'ayu lecha yamei sheva shabbatot. You'll have these 7 weeks of years, shabbatot hashanim. Teisha ve'arba'im shana. Altogether, 49 years. So God commands that the Israelites in the old days used to actually count the years. Just like we count the days right now between Pesach and Shavuot, they used to count each year as part of this big 50-year cycle. ועברת שופר תרועה בחודש השביעי בעשור לחודש ביום הכיפורים. And then on that 50th year, to announce the 50th year, the Jubilee year, you have to blow the shofar. On Yom Kippur, you blow the shofar. V'kidashtem et shnat ha-chamishim, and you shall sanctify the 50th year. Ukratem dror ba'aretz, you will proclaim liberty in the land. Ukratem dror ba'aretz, proclaim freedom for the whole land. Lechol yoshveya, yovel hi, it is a jubilee year. V'shaftem ish al achuzato ve'ish el mishpachto tashuvu. Everybody should return back to their lands. Everybody returns back to their ancestral lands. When they came to Israel at the beginning, the 12 tribes, they apportioned the land. Every family got their portion of land, their inheritance in the Holy Land. And whenever they would do any kind of real estate outside of major cities in all the major lands, if you basically just leased out the land for up to 50 years. And when the next Jubilee came, you had to return the land to its original tribal owner, or whoever, the original family that owned it. So you couldn't sell anything permanently. It was only a lease up to 50 years. Also, a good point to note here, sometimes people ask, when is Rosh Hashanah? When is the new year? Is it in Nisan or is it in Tishrei? I think here you have a good argument for another piece of evidence to prove that Rosh Hashanah, the new year, begins in Tishrei. Because it says you count 49 years, and at the 50th year, at the start of the 50th year, it doesn't say start, but it's obviously implied that when the 50th year hits in Tishrei, where it says it's Nisan. Tishrei is Chodesh Shvi.
Right, exactly.
Right. So the classic question is, how do you know the year starts in the 7th month? Why not from the 1st month?
Well, the New Year's for the world, and the New Year's for the Jews.
Right. Yeah, so like Nisan is specifically the new year for Israel, and Tishrei is the new year for the whole world, which will actually fit in with this Cosmic Jubilee idea very well. So here's another piece of evidence that Rosh Hashanah really does have to start in Tishrei. Like it says here, when the 50th year begins on Yom Kippur, you proclaim the forthcoming year, this new 50th year, as the Jubilee. Okay, great. That part we know. That's what the Torah says. They used to count 49 years. 50th year was a Jubilee. You proclaim freedom. All the slaves go free. Everybody goes back to their ancestral land. And we start again. As if we just came into the Holy Land for the first time with Yoshua in the Exodus, post-Exodus generation. That's the pshat. Now, Rabbeinu Bechaya is going to reveal an amazing secret. So Rabbeinu Bechaya's commentary on the Torah, he lived from 1255 to 1340. So we're talking 700 years ago, wrote a very profound commentary on the Torah, was a big Kabbalist in his days. This is Bechaya ben Asher. There's two Rabbeinu Bechayas. This is Bechaya ben Asher ibn Halawa, for those who are keeping track. There's two Rabbeinu Bechayas. So this is the Rabbeinu Bechaya who wrote the Torah commentary. So this is what he says. He explains the pshat first, and then he says, Ve'al derech HaKabbalah, Kabbalistically, what is the meaning here? Ve'shavta haaretz Shabbat le'Hashem, that the land should keep a Sabbath for God. What is this about? Keneged v'chad chariv. This is actually corresponding to what our sages taught, that there's a 7,000 year cycle, there's 6,000 years of civilization as we know it, and then the 7th millennium, chad chariv, is like, they call it almost like the Sabbath of desolation. That's what chad chariv really means. But it's not desolation, it's the Sabbath, meaning there's no work. There's 6,000 years of working and struggling and challenges and all of that. And then the 7th millennium of reward and God's a perfect, harmonious kingdom of heaven on earth kind of thing. So Rabbeinu Bechai says this is what it's really talking about. The 7th year, the sabbatical year, the secret here in the Torah is that it's talking about the 7th millennium, the final Sabbath millennium. Sha'u kulo Shabbat u'menucha l'chayei olamim. As we say in many different places, we are awaiting that world. We're working towards the 7th millennium, which is kulo Shabbat, which is like a 1,000-year Sabbath. Ve'u ha'olam haba she'achar atchiyah. This is what olam haba is. When we say olam haba, what are we talking about? Olam haba is this world, this final, past the resurrection. That's what he says, achar atchiyah, after all the righteous come back to life and enjoy a 1,000-year Sabbath of delight and harmony and pleasure and all of this, and perfect balance between the physical and the spiritual. So we spoke about this before.
1,000 years then?
1,000 years of Olam Haba, yeah.
But people will live 1,000 years?
Yeah, presumably they get 1,000-year reward, like Adam was supposed to live 1,000 years, right? So they will live the full 1,000-year period. We spoke a little bit about this in the series on reincarnation. We mentioned the difference between reincarnation and resurrection, so it's all kind of connected to. You can review that 3-part series on reincarnation. So, Rabbeinu Bechaya says, when our sages said that there's 6,000 years of civilization and a 7,000th that's chad chariv, that's desolate, they didn't mean literally desolate. They meant meaning that there's no more avodah, that we're not working because it's a Sabbath. It's a Sabbath of delights. And we spoke about this particular Gemara and Midrash many times in the past. It's mentioned in many different places. If you remember, we did the class on the Kabbalistic history of the world. You remember that class about a year ago? And we talked about this particular Shemitah, this particular sabbatical cycle, and we went through how the 6,000 years correspond to the 6 days. So this class is kind of a sequel to that class. It's a standalone sequel. That class was more about this particular Shemitah that we're in, and tonight we want to actually expand it and look at the entire 50,000 year cycle and how things will change, how humanity evolves and changes through this 50,000 year period. So Rabbeinu Bechaya continues, Sheva Shanim, Sheva Pa'amim. Why does the Torah say count 7 years 7 times? Ve'ayu lecha yamei Sheva Shabbatot Hashanim. So Rabbeinu Bechaya asks, Mat tzorech leosif velomar ve'ayu lecha, and so on. Why does the Torah seem so redundant here? Why repeat itself, right? If you notice when we read the passages, the Torah said multiple times, or kind of like 2 times, count 7 years 7 times. Count 7 years 7 times. And it says, really, besod ha'inyan, ki baha lashon besipur ha'mitzvah ha'meula hazot, really the secret of this amazing mitzvah, levaer al ha'hoveh, it's to tell you about the present, but also lirmoz al ha'atid. It's to teach you about the future. So the first time it says to count 7 years 7 times, it's talking about the actual mitzvah that they used to do in the present in ancient Israel of counting 49 years. The second time is to tell you about the future, about the Cosmic Jubilee, this grand jubilee of 49,000 years. Remez leyovel hagadol. It's an allusion to the great Cosmic Jubilee. And then he says, "Ubesharei habina shenimsaru leMoshe akol inyan echad." Remember last time we spoke about the 50 gates of understanding, right? There were 50 gates of understanding, and we said last time that Moshe got all 50 except one. You remember this? The Gemara says that Moshe got 49 gates and not the 50th. Rabbeinu Bechaya says, what is the secret of this, the 50 gates? What does it actually mean that Moshe got 49 gates, the secret of all 49 gates, but not the 50th? It's because that he actually got to see all 49,000 years of the Jubilee cycle and not the 50th. That's what he's going to explain here. Nirmaz betchilat Kohelet ve'aretz le'olam omedet. It's alluded to in Ecclesiastes. In Kohelet, King Solomon said that the earth remains forever, seemingly. What does this mean, ve'aretz le'olam omedet? That the world endures le'olam. Ve'u olamo shel yovel ha'olam. This is referring to the Cosmic Jubilee, that the world keeps going over and over and over again, gets recycled over and over again. There's a cosmic cycle. V'zeu sod 50 sha'arei bina. This is the secret of the 50 gates of understanding. V'chulan nimsaru leMoshe chutz me'echad. Moshe got all 50 except one. Based on that verse in Tehillim we explored last time in Psalm 8, v'techasreu me'at me'elohim. You made him a little bit less than God, meaning he was privy to all of history. Moshe was given a vision of all of mankind, but not everything. He was a little bit less than Elohim, and that's why that Moshe got a little bit less than the divine. Moshe was given a vision of all 49,000 years, past, present, and future, but not the 50th. That's the secret of what it means that Moshe did not get the 50th gate. And King David also alluded to this. King David wrote in Psalm 145, in Ashrei, we say it multiple times a day, Malchutcha malchut kol olamim. Right? What does that mean? Malchutcha malchut kol olamim. Your God, King David says, God, your kingship is through all the worlds. What do you mean all the worlds? Which worlds? Kol olamim. What is he talking about? So Rabbeinu Bechaya says it's talking about all of these Jubilee, all of these sabbaticals, through all of the reincarnations, cycles of civilization. In each cycle of civilization, God reigns, of course. That's what King David really meant when he said, Malchutcha malchut kol olamim. Umemshalatcha bechol dor vador. In each and every generation throughout this 50,000 year or 49,000 year cycle, God reigns. And of course, there's a deeper meaning there. When you say Malchutcha malchut kol olamim, what is it actually alluding to? It's alluding to the 49th gate, which is Malchut shebe Malchut. Remember, each day and each year corresponds to a sfira within the sfira, right? Day 1 is Chesed shebe Chesed, and year 1 is Chesed shebe Chesed, and year 2 is Gvura shebe Chesed, and then Tiferet shebe Chesed, right? And the 8th is Chesed shebe Gvura. Remember that? When we say Malchutcha Malchut Kol Olamim, it's also a secret allusion to Malchut Shebe Malchut, which is the 49th day, which is the 49th year, which was the 49th millennium. It's the end of the process. So King David is really saying, you reign through all the Olamim, through all the civilizations, until the 49th, through to the 49th thousand. Malchut Shebe Malchut. And what is a dor? Umemshalatcha bechol dor vador. So Rabbeinu Bechai explains, it says also in Tehillim in Psalm 105, Davar tziva le'elef dor, that God commanded the Torah seemingly for 1,000 generations or to 1,000 generations, to the 1,000th generation. And Rabbeinu Bechai says, Ki dor kmo olam. Dor is like an olam, like a civilization. Metaphorically, one generation is one civilization. V'zeu 50 shana. And really, one generation, he says, is 50 years, is one jubilee. Okay? One jubilee can be likened to one generation. Uba remez b'milat kol u'b'milat lecha ki hakol kavana achat v'zeh mevuach. So he says the gematria of the word kol and the gematria of the word lecha is 50. So when God says ve'ayu lecha, it's also alluding to this 50-year cycle. So there's a connection between dor and the sabbatical cycles. Okay, every generation is like dor vador is each and every cosmic jubilee. And just as an interesting aside, Rabbeinu Bechai says that there's a connection between dor and 50 years. So there's a very interesting thing here that, remember in the Torah where it says in chapter 6 of Bereshit, where God says, man has become too sinful, I will cut his life short at 120 years. Remember this? Now, that's a very puzzling verse. And many have asked the question on it. We don't see that people stop living at 120 in those days. Because even after this, people keep living longer.
Right, 175.
Right? Yeah. Abraham was 175. Yitzhak was 180. People lived for many, Yaakov, they all lived for much longer than 120, even after this. Even Noah lived after this. Noah lived 950 years. So how can it be that God said, I'm going to cut their lifespan at 120? It's not true. Even later in Tanakh, Yehoiada lived 130 years. Even many, many years later, in the times of the kingdom already. People can live more than 120. So how did our sages interpret this? One opinion was God was only saying that the flood would come in 120 years. That's another way of interpreting it. This is when God decreed the flood and said, if humanity doesn't fix itself and doesn't repent, the flood will come. And he gave mankind 120 years to repent. That's one interpretation of it. But I think there's a really interesting way to interpret this. It just hit me in thinking about this, that if you do the math, if you say that a jubilee is 50 years. So when God says, I'm going to give them 120, maybe you can read this as, I'm going to give them 120 jubilees. Because 120 jubilees is 6,000 years. Wow. 120 times 50 is 6,000. So I think, this is just my speculation, one could see this as an allusion to God giving each sabbatical cycle 6,000 years of civilization and then time for Shabbat.
Wow.
Right?
That seems so much more powerful.
Makes sense, right? So 50, 120 makes 50 times 120 is 6,000. So when God says, I'm giving mankind 120, what he's really saying is 120 jubilees. And that's why each cycle of civilization is 6,000 years as we know it, 6,000 years of hard work, and then 1,000 years of Shabbat. That was just my little interpretation of that. Okay, now we're going to get into the meat of this whole idea. So Rabbeinu Bechai explains, Ve'al derech HaKabbalah, Yovel hi milashon. Where does the word Yovel come from? Where does the word Jubilee? Okay, in English it's Jubilee because it's just transliterated from the Hebrew Yovel. The Yud becomes a J, Yovel, Jubilee. Okay, great. But what does it actually mean? Where does it come from? What does it sound like? So you could connect it to like Yuval, who was music, the first musician, and because you would blow the shofar and proclaim this music of liberty in the land, you could say that. But Rabbeinu Bechai says it's actually coming from the word Ve'al Yuval yishalach sharashav. It's a verse in Yirmiyahu where he said, we know this verse. It actually the verse right before it starts by saying, Baruch HaGever asher iftach be'Hashem, ve'haya Hashem miftacho, which we say in Birkat HaMazon and all that. Praiseworthy, blessed is the man who trusts only in God, and then God will become his trust. Very important to remember. We talked many times about Jewish people. Israel should be Yashar El, to be straight to God. Israel is Yashar El, straight to God, no intermediaries. We don't rely on anybody else. Don't put your trust in anybody. Baruch HaGever asher iftach be'Hashem. Blessed is the person who trusts solely in God. You have faith in God and nobody else. No humans, no intermediaries, no angels, no saints, no holy people, no nobody. You, God, Yashar El. And he actually also says, Arura Gever, right? Cursed is the man who trusts in other people, in flesh and blood. So be blessed is the man who trusts in God. V'aya ke'etz shatul al mayim, and he will be like a tree that's firmly planted by a river, al yuval yishalach shorshav, by a stream, by a flowing stream. So it's getting a lot of water and nourishment, and its branches will grow really healthy. So Rabbeinu Bechaya says, Yovel, Jubilee, is related to the word Yuval, which means a flowing stream. Why? Ki kol hadorot yovlu el hasiba harishona. Because all of these generations, all of these civilizations are all flowing from one to the next. There's growth from one to the next. There's rectification from one to the next. The seventh is better than the sixth, which is better than the fifth, which is better than the fourth. It's all getting better and better, flowing towards an end goal. And what is that end goal? Asiba Rishona, the very first cause of creation, coming back to God. It's a cycle that takes you back to God. Everything started with God, with the infinite, and everything returns to God, to the infinite. ולכך נקרא היובל בשם דרור, היובל אשר שם שורשי הדורות הנבראים כולן. That's why the word dror is used. It's actually connected to dor. Dror, proclaim liberty in the land. It's actually also alluding to dor, all the generations, like a flowing stream. And it's streaming through history, through this cycle, from the first to the second to the third sabbatical. And we're going to go into each of the sabbaticals and what happened in each one and where we are, because that's what we want to know ultimately. Which sabbatical are we in? Are we in the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh? Where are we? That's one opinion. Let's see. I'm going to present three possibilities, and I'll give you the one that I think makes the most sense. Ki kol achat min hasheva poelet sheva alafim ve'ina memtet. So each of these 7 chunks of 7,000 years, which are 49,000 altogether, ksheishlemu leolam 49 iyet tohu vavohu. At the end of 49,000 years, we return to tohu vavohu, the initial primordial kind of chaos before creation. Ve'yashuv klal leyovel kmo shene'etzal misham. Everything goes back from where it came. Ve'haven zeh, understand this, v'zeu lashon hakatuv, this is what it really means when the Torah says, bishnat hayovel hazot tashuvu ish el achuzato. When the Torah says, in the Jubilee year, everything goes back to its original place, what is that really secretly alluding to? That at the end, after 50,000 years, in the Cosmic Jubilee, everything goes back to God and everything is reset. So you have this 49,000 years, 7 chunks of 7,000, flowing from one to the next, improving from one to the next, as we shall see. And finally, everything's rectified and complete, and God presses restart. And we go back to Tohu Vavohu, we go back to the beginning, primordial chaos, and start again. We have these chunks of 50,000 years. Bishnat hayovel yashuv v'chachmei mechkar, and the philosophers of ancient times, hiskiu bilshonam, called this in their words, akol haya me'asiba rishona v'akol shav el hasiba rishona. Everything began with the first cause, and everything shall return to the first cause. And Rabbeinu Bechaya is not the only one who said this. A little bit before him, the Ramban spoke about it also, but very cryptically. Rabbeinu Bechaya has a long exposition on this. The Ramban in the same place in his commentary on the Torah, chapter 25, Vayikra, says it much more shorter. He just says, Moshe was given all 50 gates of understanding except one. Ki kol shmita shar bait echad. Every sabbatical is one of these gates. Every 1,000 years really is one of these gates. Vehine hodiu kol ha'avaya mitchila ve'ad sof chutz min hayovel kodesh. So the Ramban cryptically says the same thing as Rabbeinu Bechaya, that Moshe was given the entire 49,000 span of history, past, present, and future, but was not given the 50th Cosmic Jubilee. He did not see what happens then. So to summarize, you have 6,000 years of hard work and challenge and growth and doing stuff, a reward of 1,000 years, and then civilization kind of restarts, moves to the next phase, and then to the next phase, and to the next phase, and we have a total of 50,000 years. Make sense? I also want to point out, if you remember we spoke about this before on a number of occasions, that there's also an astronomical cycle called the precession of the equinoxes. You remember that we have actually 13 zodiac signs, and the sun appears at noon, right, over the course of the year, Why is right now we're in, what are we in now? Tauros. Why are we in Tauros? Because if you look at where the sun is at noon, it's in the constellation Tauros. And next month when it's Gemini, if you look at the sun at noon, it would be in the sky where Gemini is. And then Cancer. And right? So the cycle repeats every year. And then there's a grand cycle of approximately 26,000 years called the precession of the equinoxes. So right now, during the equinoxes, during the spring equinox, when night and day are exactly equal, when's the spring equinox? The spring equinox is in March. It's in Pisces. For the past 2,000 years, the spring equinox has been in Pisces. We're actually now transitioning, and soon the spring equinox will be in Aquarius. We're transitioning into the age of Aquarius. We're at the end of the age of Pisces. Before Pisces was the age of Aries. The spring equinox would be in Aries. And that's really when the Torah says that Nisan is Chodesh Aviv. Aviv is the spring equinox, and Nisan is Aries. So when the Torah was given, actually it was perfect. It aligned exactly. That Aries aligned with the spring equinox with Chodesh Aviv. We're actually shifting away from that. Now the spring equinox is in Pisces. And before Aries, it was in Tauros. So there's each zodiac sign rules, so to speak, for 2,000 years. So you have a 26,000 year cycle. It's a little bit less than 26,000 years. So actually, one cosmic jubilee of 50,000 years is like two of these astrological cycles, which are each astronomical cycles, precessions of the equinox, which are 25,700-ish years each. So two of them would be about 51 and a bit thousand years. So there's actually also, I'm going to come back to this, because it's going to be helpful for us to figure out which Shemitah we're in. So a cosmic jubilee of 50,000 years is roughly two precessions of the equinoxes. Keep those two things in mind. So now we want to explore which Shemitah are we in? Where are we in the big picture in these phases? So remember, each 7,000 year chunk, 7 times 7,000, also corresponds to, just like we spoke about last time in Sfirat HaOmer, to the 7 lower Sfirot. All right, all of Kabbalah is built on 10 Sfirot. The top 3, the Mochin, are really spiritual, ethereal, intellectual, kind of otherworldly, hard to grasp. But here in the physical world, in the cosmos, we see 7s manifest. The 7 lower Sfirot are primarily manifest in the physical cosmos. And that's why we have all these patterns of 7 colors of the rainbow, 7 musical notes, 7 continents, 7 heavens, 7 all these things that are 7 days of the week, 7 visible luminaries, right? Sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. All these things that are 7 are all connected to each other. 7 letters in the Hebrew alphabet that have 2 sounds, right? Bet, Gimel, Daled, and then Kaf, Pei, Reish, Taf have 2 sounds, also corresponding to this. All these 7s are connected. And all of that emerges from the 7 lower Sfirot. So that means the first 7,000 year chunk of civilization was the era of Chesed, the first Sfirah. Remember, Chesed is kindness. Chesed is easiness, positivity, water. It's the element of Chesed is water. It's flow. It's nice. There's not much challenge or struggle in Chesed. It's pure kindness. Then the second chunk of 7,000 years is the era of Gvura. What's Gvura? Gvura is persistence. Din. It's judgment. It's severity. It's strictness. It's challenge. It's associated with fire. The element of Gvura is fire. So the second Shemitah is the Shemitah of fire. The third Shemitah, the third chunk, the third 7,000 year chunk is the Sfirah of Tiferet. Tiferet is harmony. It's symmetry, literally. Beauty. Truth, right? It's also called Emet. It's truth. It's associated with air, the element of air. It's spirit. It's very spiritual. It's very lofty. Then the fourth would be Netzach. Netzach means literally victory or eternity. Dominance, persistence. It's the place of faith. It's the place of prophecy. There's also struggle there. It's dominance, right? It's victory. To have victory, you need struggle. Right? Military is associated with it. Sport. We talked about music. Lam Natseach. Many psalms start with Lam Netzeach, the connection to Netzach. All of these rhythms, it's very rhythmic. So that's Netzach. That would be the fourth one. And the element, as we spoke about last time, who remembers? What did I suggest was the element of Netzach?
Light.
Electricity, right? Netzach is associated with electricity, with Chashmal. And then the fifth 7,000-year chunk would be Hod. Hod literally means majesty, splendor. It's associated with light. It's the element of light. And it literally means gratitude. Lehodot, acknowledgement. That's Hod. That would be the fifth. The sixth is Yesod. Yesod literally means foundation. It's reproduction. It's intimacy. It's that whole space. And it's associated with the earth, with the actual dust of the earth. And finally, the seventh is Malchut, is kingdom. Kingship, leadership, which requires humility, we said, and speech. Malchut peh. Eliyahu says, Patach Eliyahu Navi reveals Malchut is peh. It's all associated with speech. It's associated with leadership and humility. Because what is leadership? We said last time, leadership is really humility. Being a proper leader is being no ego, not being a tyrant. It's not about you, it's about the people you're leading. And speech, because you lead by speech, essentially, by command, by inspiring people through speech, by enlightening people through speech. That's what a leader is. The power of the leader is speech. And the quality required is humility. So that's malchut. It's also called shiflut, lowliness. So we would expect the 7 chunks of 7,000 years to correspond to these qualities. The first 7,000 is a time of chesed and water. The theme is chesed and water. The second one is gvura and fire. The third is tiferet, truth and spirit and air. And the fourth is victory, eternity, dominance and electricity. And the fifth is light and gratitude and acknowledgement and majesty. And the sixth is reproduction and intimacy and earth and all of that. And the seventh is leadership and speech and humility and all of that, okay? That's what we would expect. So where are we in this grand scheme of things? Yeah, because we're in the 6th millennium. Remember, there's within, we're in the 6th millennium in our current cycle. So we are in Yesod in terms of our millennium. We're in the year 5785 on the Jewish calendar. So we're in the 6th millennium. We're in the year 5785. So yes, the energy of our millennium right now is Yesod. But we want to, like I said, I want to zoom out. We talked about this particular sabbatical in the Kabbalistic history of the world class. This one is a zoom out. Where are we in the big picture in the 7,000 of these 7 possible 7,000? So there's 3 major opinions that you'll find, that I found in Jewish texts. 3 possibilities. The earliest text to discuss this, even before Rabbeinu Bechaya, is called Sefer HaTmuna. Sefer HaTmuna is one of the most ancient Kabbalistic texts that we have. I'm partway through a translation and commentary. It's been on my to-do list for a very long time. I hope to finish, God willing, soon. Hopefully by the end of the year. So Sefer HaTmuna is the first. It goes back, it's dated back to the 2nd century. It's often attributed to Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana or Rabbi Ishmael, those great mystics of the 1st and 2nd century, at the end of the Second Temple era and immediately after the Second Temple. But it was first actually published sometime in the 13th century, maybe a little bit before the Zohar. But it goes back for sure. It's a much more ancient text. It's in Hebrew. It's very similar to Sefer Yetzirah in some ways. It actually just goes through all the Hebrew letters and explains them. It's very similar to Sefer Yetzirah in its overview, but in practice it's quite different. And it explains each letter. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating text. So Sefer HaTmuna suggests that we're in the 2nd Shemitah. Now, it doesn't have like a chapter where it focuses on this idea and explains this idea. It just kind of keeps saying in many places that we're in the Shemitah Shenit. It doesn't explain it. It just kind of throws it kind of like casually as if you already know. It almost seems like it assumes you know that we are in the 2nd Shemitah. So, but why does it make that case? I think, if you kind of put it all together, because the 2nd Shemitah is the Shemitah of Gvura, of din, of severity, of strictness, of judgment, of struggle. The left side, remember? And if you look at the world around us, what do we see? We see all of that. We see a lot of suffering. We see a lot of judgment. We see a lot of punishment, war, suffering. We see a lot of fire, right? It's the Shemitah of fire. And we see a lot of that. So we can understand why Sefer HaTmuna would suggest that we're in the 2nd Shemitah. And the Torah itself, there is an idea that the Torah reveals itself a little bit differently in each Shemitah.
Right.
Either more of the Torah is revealed in each Shemitah, which I'll get to, or the same Torah is revealed in a different flavor. And there's various ways to understand this. It could be that it's the same written Torah, but a different oral Torah. Meaning the way we interpret the written text in each Shemitah is different. And in this particular Shemitah, the focus is on halacha, on din, on judgment, on rules, on rituals, on stringencies. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. This is punishment, this is punishment, this is capital punishment, this is corporal punishment. Right? The Torah, the oral Torah in particular, in this Shemitah seems to be very much din related. So we can understand why we would be in the second Shemitah. Another understanding is that it's the same letters. The Torah has 304,805 letters, and they are rearranged in each Shemitah. There's an idea that the Torah has 600,000 letters. You've probably heard of this. There were 600,000 souls at Mount Sinai, corresponding to each letter of the Torah. So you'll often hear the Torah has 600,000 letters, but if you actually count, it doesn't. It only has 304,805. So our sages said, why? Because the Torah is black fire on white fire. The Torah also has white letters that you don't see. There's black letters that we see, the actual ink, and then there's the white fire that we don't see. And they allude to this, they give you a hint to this by saying, if you look at the letter Pei, inside the letter Pei is actually a letter Bet, a very clear letter Bet. If you look at the way a proper Pei is drawn, inside of it is a little Bet. That's the white fire. And so there's black fire and white fire. So there is also a later idea, from later Kabbalistic sources that say that it's the same black letters but rearranged and maybe, kind of shifted so that it's expressed a little bit differently. Different ideas of what it means that the Torah is expressed in a different way or evolves itself. Same characters but rearranged. That's another possibility. So one way we can understand why Sefer HaTmunah would argue, and those who hold like Sefer HaTmunah, that we're in the second Shemitah. Because we do see a lot of din, judgment, severity. God in the Torah seems to be very judgmental, right? He says he's an Elkanah. He's a very zealous God. He's a punishing God. Now, having said that, I've been talking a lot about, in recent months, about how the Torah doesn't have to be so harsh. And halacha doesn't have to be so strict, right? Not necessarily, that we've overdone it, that in recent centuries we've kind of gone too far, that the Torah itself can actually be quite balanced. Torah is tiferet, Torah is emet. The Torah in and of itself is very balanced. Maybe the oral tradition has made it much more stringent than the pshat. So I'm going to refine this, because we have to come back to that. Because how can maybe we're not in the second Shemitah. We have to look at some of the other opinions, okay? But that, for those who view it this way, that would explain it. Why we have a very stringent halacha Torah, and why the world has so much suffering. Because we're in the second Shemitah. Make sense? That's the Sefer HaTmunah argument. I'm going to jump ahead to a more recent argument, which was made by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. We all know Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. Phenomenal mind. Sadly passed away quite young in the 1980s. He was both a great chacham, giant, and also a scientist with a master's in physics. And he tried to integrate. He did a lot of the pioneering work in integrating Torah and science. Right? His writings are incredible. He managed to write so much in such a short lifespan. And his Sefer Yetzirah is an incredible work, translation and commentary. It should be standard reading for everybody. He also has one on Sefer HaBa'ir. Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan quotes from, or bases his opinion on a 13th, 14th century rabbi, Yitzhak Dman Akko. Yitzhak Dman Akko, famously in 1305. He was from Akko, from Akri in Israel. At the time, it was a crusader town. And famous story, Yitzhak Dman Akko in the year 1305 went to Spain to try and figure out, to ascertain the validity of the Zohar. Because at this point, the Zohar had been published, remember, in the year 1290. I spoke a lot about this recently. The Zohar was first published, revealed to the public in 1290. And in 1305, Yitzhak Dman Akko wanted to say, where did this come from? We've never heard of this book. So he actually traveled to Spain to figure out where it came from and to see if it's legit or not. That's what he's known for. And some say, the Chida says that he was a student of the Ramban. And remember, the Ramban is one of the sources, the early sources that speaks about the Cosmic Jubilee. So Yitzhak ben Akko seemed to suggest that we're in the 7th Shemitah. We're in the Shemitah of Malchut, in the 7th and final Shemitah. And Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan liked this one. And he used it for a particular purpose. Why did he like this one? And why did he go with this suggestion? More because of physics. Why? Because Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan was trying to explain why scientists calculated the age of the universe to be about 15 billion years. Today we know it's usually estimated to be 13.7 or 13.8 billion years. At that time, the numbers were a little more, maybe 14 billion, 15 billion, but roughly 15 billion years. And he said that we can explain it if we follow Yitzhak ben Akko's suggestion. Why? Because Yitzhak ben Akko said that when you calculate these cycles, don't use regular human years and days, use the divine years. What's a divine year? Remember, it says, Elef shanim be'enecha keyom etmol, right? It says in Psalms that 1,000 years for us is like a day for you. You remember this? Elef shanim be'enecha. In your eyes, God, 1,000 human years is like yesterday, like one day, etmol, that passed. So Yitzhak ben Akko said, you should count it as divine years. So if you now if we're in the 7th Shemitah, that means how many years have elapsed prior to ours? 42,000, right? There has already been 6 sabbaticals of 7,000. 6 times 7,000 is 42,000. I should have told you guys to bring a calculator. 6 times 7 is 7,000 is 42,000. So that means we've already had 42,000 years before this current sabbatical. So Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan says, well, Yitzhak ben Akko said, look at this as divine years. So how do you convert to divine years? Multiply by 365 and multiply by 1,000. Because 1,000 years for us is one day for God. So you have to multiply by 365,000. And what do you get? If you multiply 42,000 by 365 by 1,000, you get 15 billion. So Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan said, you see, look, we have Torah proof that the universe can be 15 billion years old if we follow this logic, based on Yitzhak ben Akko's book from 700 years ago. So that's why Rabbi Kaplan liked that particular one, because it would help support this scientific finding of the universe being so old. That would be the case for Malchut, okay? I'm not crazy about it. I think it's a bit of a stretch, although I love Rabbi Kaplan. But this one's seems a little bit of a stretch for me. There are advantages, though, to suggesting that we're in the Shemitah of Malchut, because Malchut is also associated with Din, with judgment. It is tied to Gvura a little bit. It is a little bit called emptiness, shiflut. It is tied to kingship, which also implies some form of judgment. And it's also associated with Mashiach things, with kingdoms. We are living in a Shemitah, a time of great kingdom. History is full of kingdoms and empires and kings fighting each other. History is dominated by kings and kingdoms. And we're all awaiting Mashiach, the final king, Melech HaMashiach. So from that perspective, you could say the theme of this Shemitah, you see, is very much about kings and Mashiachs and Malchut, this energy. That would be the case for saying we're in the 7th Shemitah. The third opinion is the one that I think is what I like. I think it's the most accurate. I think it makes the most sense, and it actually integrates a lot of these ideas. And it integrates the first opinion. It actually includes the Sefer HaTmuna opinion that we're in the 2nd Shemitah, but puts a spin on it, which makes perfect sense. Explains it in a way that makes perfect sense. And this is the opinion of the Tiferes Yisrael, who was the rabbi of Dessau and of Danzig in Germany. So he lived 1782 to 1860. Right? So he passed away a year after Darwin published On the Origin of Species. And I say that on purpose, you'll see why. So this is Rav Yisrael Lipschitz, the Tiferes Yisrael. So he wrote a very profound commentary on the Mishnah, very well known, his commentary on the Mishnah. And at the end of Seder Nezikin, he has a whole long exposition called Drush Orach Chaim about this, the Cosmic Jubilee, and his take on Olam Haba and all of that. Amazing thing. Amazing. Very long. We can't go through all of it. But first, he does a lot of what we did here. He quotes Rabbeinu Bechaye. He mentions the Ramban, various other sources. He quotes the Gemara about the 6,000 years. Mizmor Shir Leyom HaShabbat, Leyom Shekulo Shabbat. He quotes all that we've explored. He also quotes a midrash in Kohelet Rabbah, which we don't really have time for, but it's based on a verse in Ecclesiastes where King Solomon says, Et hakol asa yefeh be'ito. God made everything nice in its exact time. Amar Rabbi Abahu, he brings a very famous verse that we've all heard before, that we learn from this, Mikan shaya hakadosh baruch hu boneh olamot umachrivan, boreh olamot umachrivan. That God would create before our world, God already created previous worlds. And he would see, do I like this one or not? This one pleases me, this one doesn't. And there was a sequence of worlds prior to ours already. So that's a clear ancient midrashic source from Midrash Rabbah that also supports the notion of the Cosmic Jubilee, that further supports this idea, that God already created previous civilizations and destroyed them before ours. So Tiferes Yisrael quotes all of these sources. And then he says this, וכתב עוד שבכל שמיטה ושמיטה נזכר לעיל יהיה העולם נברא בהשלמה יתירה יותר מבתחילה. With each shmita, with each 7,000 year segment, we're improving on the previous one. Okay. All of the sources really suggest this, that we're improving with each. They're not standalone, unrelated to each other. It's not like civilization's totally extinguished and starts from zero. There is some flow from one to the next. Remember, like Rabbeinu Bechaya said, it's a yuval, it's a flow, it's a stream. So each 7,000 year chunk builds on the previous one. And then, lebasof yichzerun kol nitzutzei kedusha, until the very end, when all God's sparks of holiness will be rectified, the way that they were at the beginning, bitchilat briat haolam. Okay, so each Shemitah has its own tikkun, each corresponds to its specific sphira, and each has its job to do, and at the end of the 49,000, everything is done. And then he says, all these sevens correspond to each other, like we already said. So he says, Zayin Yamei Shabta, Zayin Yamei Pesach, Yamei Sukkot, Yamei Nida, Yamei Nekiim, Yamim Kodem Amilah, all these 7 days, chunks of 7 days of the week, 7 days of Pesach, 7 days of Sukkot, 7 days of Nida, 7 days before Brit Milah, 7 days of mourning, he even says, Yamei Avelut, Yamei Mishteh, after a wedding, Sheva Brachot. All of these correspond to Shanim Shemitah, to these sabbatical years, Shmitot Bayovel. They all correspond to each other, and even to the Kanei Menorah, to the 7 branches of the menorah. All sevens are related. It's all the same 7. And then he focuses specifically on how they correspond to the 7 days of creation. Shelezayin akafot ha'olam halalu, he calls them akafot. He calls these cycles akafot, literally cycles. Romzim zayin yamei bereshit. The 7 days of creation correspond to these 7 sabbaticals. Shekol echad haya achana leyom shalei acharav. Just like in creation, each day built on the previous day, right? Day 6 built on day 5, built on day 4, built on day 3. Same thing with the sabbaticals. Each sabbatical builds on the previous one. And then he says this, which cycle are we in? And he says this is based on the Kabbalistic tradition that he received. Besod Hashem li'ira'av, this is a verse, the secret of God is for those who fear Him. Shenimsar lahem, that we have this tradition, those who fear God have this tradition. She'anachnu ka'et be'akafa, we are currently in which sabbatical? Akafa Daled. We're in the 4th sabbatical. So Sefer HaTmunah said 2nd, Yitzhak Dman Alko and Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan said just the 7th. The Tiferes Yisrael says we're in the 4th. She'u lefi seder sheshet emei bereshit aniskar le'ayil, corresponding to the 6 days of creation. Keneged yom revi'i, what happened on the 4th day of creation? Shebo he'emid HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what did God make on the 4th day? No. Hameorot. He made the luminaries, the sun and the moon and the stars. ולכן גם בהיקף זה עלה אור התורה, הוא השמש המאירה, מקצה הארץ ועד קצהו. הוא המאור הגדול. So he says, just like in the 4th day, the theme of the 4th day was sun and then moon and stars. 4th sabbatical is a sabbatical of Torah. The Torah is now revealed and the Torah is the illuminator. The Torah is the luminary. The Torah is המאור הגדול that shines upon the world. שאף על פי שבעולם הזה כבוד האומה הקדושה ירדה מאוד, even though in this sabbatical it looks like the Jewish people are very much denigrated and oppressed, Nonetheless, aval Torah kedusha ta'amod kashemesh bahira be'emtzait ha'ofek. But the Torah itself is very bright, shines very brightly upon the world. עד שכל האומות, אפילו אותן שמוציאין את עצמן לבלתי מחויבים לשמור מצוותיה, almost all the nations of the world, even though they don't fulfill the Torah's mitzvahs, כנוצרים וישמעאלים, like Christians and Muslims, kulam, they still all honor the Torah, and they all claim connection to the Torah. They all claim to be connected to Abraham and Yitzhak and whoever, and the forefathers, to David, right? All Christians and Muslims venerate those same leaders, and Moses, and everybody. Christianity and Islam would not exist without the Torah. So the Torah is honored and venerated by everybody. And the Torah has really shaped the entire planet. And it has. It's the number one bestseller in all of history, always. Right? It's shaped the entire planet. It's shaped all of human history. Torah has transformed the world. I've shared this idea before that if aliens were to come to this planet and ask, what is the one thing that defines planet Earth, that has shaped the planet more than anything else throughout its history? The answer would have to be the Torah. It's given religion to most of the world's people. It's shaped everything. It's shaped so many empires and kingdoms and wars and all of these eras of history, right? Everything comes back to Torah, ultimately. And that's what the Tiferes Yisrael says, that this is the sabbatical of Torah, which is related to the sun and moon and luminaries, to illuminating the world. And it's interesting that he says Christians and Muslims. He doesn't say this, but what I'm reading from this is, you can see in the luminaries on the fourth day a very clear reference to Christianity and Islam. Why? Because Christianity was based on sun worship. Christianity was a blend of Torah with Roman paganism. Remember, Christmas was originally the Roman holiday of Sol Invictus, worshipping the indomitable sun. So the Christian, once it became Romanized and paganized, they took sun, S-U-N, and renamed it S-O-N, and it became the birth of the sun, S-O-N, and the worship of the Son of God, supposedly. Really, the elements came from Roman pagan worship. Easter was Hilaria, the Roman ritual, which also celebrated resurrection. The Roman holiday celebrating resurrection was called Hilaria. Every Sunday as well. Why do the Christian holy day is Sunday, the day of the sun? Remember, the luminaries correspond to Sunday, Monday is the moon, Tuesday, right? Mercury, Tuesday is Mars, Wednesday is Mercury. Remember this? So Christians, their holy day is the day of the sun. So the sun is almost like alludes to Christianity. And Islam, what's the symbol today of Islam? Is the moon, the crescent moon. That's become the symbol of Islam in recent centuries. And actually historians will say that pre-Islamic Arabia actually had moon worship. One of the main goddesses was a moon goddess in ancient or pre-Islamic Arabia. And there were, again, elements of that paganism that blended with Judaism and Christianity to make Islam. Muhammad kept a lot of those earlier rituals, like the Kaaba. The Kaaba was already there before in Mecca, prior to Islam. Pagans already worshipped the Kaaba prior to Islam. And then Muhammad Islamified it and made it like kosher for them, So Islam was formed from fusing Torah with Arabic paganism, which was very much connected to lunar worship, moon worship. And today the symbol for Islam, internationally recognized symbol for Islam, is the crescent moon. And Christianity came out of blending Torah with sun worship, Roman, European sun worship. So you can also see in the fourth day a clear allusion to this sabbatical in the sense that this sabbatical has been dominated by Christianity and Islam and Judaism, Torah. So that's what the Tiferes Yisrael says, that even the Notzrim and Ishmaelim, they do venerate the Torah and believe in the God of the Torah. Christians and Muslims all believe in this God, the same God of the Torah. Then he says something really amazing. Prepare to get your mind blown right now. I remember when he's writing this. This is early to mid 1800s. I think this was first published. His first commentary on the Mishnah was published in 1830. And then various editions were published later. So now he says this, look. Ve'ata, and now, achai yedidai, my brothers and friends and dear ones, ra'u al eze basis, look on what foundation, adnei Torah kedusha munachim, the pillars of the Torah are founded. כי הסוד הזה שנמסר לאבותינו ורבותינו, because this secret which has been passed on by our sages and forefathers, והם גלו לנו זה כמה מאות שנים, and they've been talking about it for centuries. Rabbeinu Bechaya talked about this. Sefer HaTmunah 2,000 years ago talked about this. Look what's going on right now, that מצאנו שוב שהטבע ברורה לעינינו. Now nature is clear to our eyes. Now we have science to support our Torah. בזמנים המאוחרים, כבזמננו בהירה ביותר. Now, in our days, when we have natural science, we can just support what our sages already have been saying for centuries. Science is catching up to Torah, amazingly. דהרוח המשתוקק שבאדם, החפץ לגלות כל העולמות. There's a natural inner drive in a human to uncover, to discover the whole world. And so what's going on now? That all the research, people are looking at kechulda, like a rat in every kravim shel adama, in every corner, in every crevice of the world. Scientists are researching every little crevice of the world. And what have we found? Beharim hayoter gvoim, in the highest mountains and in the deepest canyons. What have we found? And he actually names Be'arei Piranan, in the Pyrenees Mountains and in the Carpathian Mountains. It's cool to see how he even transliterated it, how he spells Pyrenees and Carpathian Mountains. And he says even Be'arei, I don't know what this means, maybe it means Colorado, I don't know. Be'America, he says, he uses, and the mountains and valleys of America. Uve'arei Himalaya, right? He's saying all these places. What have we found? Scientists have found that in these mountains and valleys, what do you think? What have we found? Bones and fossils. So he says, "Va'abruim sheben shurat adama." So there are layers to the earth. מצאו תמיד שאותם שמונחים בשורה התחתונה שבארץ הם בנויים בגודל ענקי יותר מאותם שמונחים בשורה של מעלה ממנה. We have layers to the earth. There are layers, and we can see different organisms in different layers. And the deeper we dig, we see extinct creatures, and they become bigger and bigger. There are these massive creatures in the so deep in the earth, fossilized creatures. And he says that scientists have discovered כמה כוחות הטבע, שהארץ קבלה פעם אחת דחיפה נוראה מקרן מערבית דרומית לקרן מזרחית צפונית, אשר על יד זה נחרבו ונשדדו כל פני הארץ. That there have been mass extinction events that have destroyed life all over the world. There have been major mass extinction events, we know. And וכן מצאו בשנת 1000 ותתז למספרם. So he's saying in the year 1807, according to the secular calendar, they found the Medinat Zibiran. For a while, I couldn't understand what he meant by Medinat Zibiran. What do you think it is? He spells it Zibirian. And then I looked it up. What was discovered then? It's Siberia. He said, what was discovered in Siberia in 1806? In 1806, Mikhail Adams discovered in Siberia the first complete woolly mammoth. Mammoth parts and pieces were discovered beforehand. They were known, but this was the first time an actual complete skeleton was discovered. And the Tiferes Yisrael quotes this, writing at the beginning of the 1800s, Biktzet tzfon shel ha'olam, in the northern edge of the world, tachat hakerach hanora, under the ice caps. What did we find? Pil echad gadol me'od, a big elephant, kmo gimel o dalet pa'amim me'asher matzanu ata, 3 or 4 times bigger than the elephants that we know. So he's describing mammoths, and he even names different scientists like Cuvier, who were doing a lot of this pioneering work. וכבר ידענו מעצמות חיה ענקי אחת שנמצאת במעמקי הארץ סביב עיר בולטימור באמריקה. It says in Baltimore they discovered these mammoths. אשר אורכה י"ז רגל, 17 foot long. וגם באירופה, and he keeps going and saying, we found these creatures all over, and they call it min chaya kazot mammoth. He even writes it. We've discovered mammoths. וכן מצאנו min bria avaniit, and we find fossilized animals. Shekarua iguanodon. He actually spells it out in Hebrew, iguanodon. Aleph Yud Gimel Vav Vav. Yeah, the iguana, one of the first dinosaurs that was discovered. Shegavoa Ein Vav Regel, 76 feet. ועוד מין חיה אחרת מצאו שקרוע megalosaurus. Right, he writes all these things, right? We found these dinosaurs, creatures that no longer exist, big, giant creatures that no longer exist. And so he explains this. So the Tiferes Yisrael, in his commentary on the Mishnah, Istaklu achai atovim, my good brothers, look, גדולת התורה ורוממתה הנפלאה. Look how great our Torah is. השגיחו הבית הגדולה שעתה מתחילת התורה, והשקיפו עליה דלת תגין שעל הבית הזאת. Listen to this, he says. Amazing secret. He says, if you look at the Torah, open the Torah, a proper Torah scroll. You open the first word in the Torah, Bereshit. The letter Bet is written big, right? The first letter of the Torah is the letter Bet, which has a value of 2. The Torah starts with a 2, and it's written enlarged. And on top of it, if you look, we put a little crown. And how many spikes do we put? We put 4. There's like the tip of the Bet and 3 spikes. Altogether 4. There's 4 tips on the top of the Bet. So he says, our sages encoded in the first letter this secret. The Bet, the 2, with the 4 crowns, with the 4 spikes, with a crown of 4 spikes. Nimsar lanu me'amekubalim, and we have this tradition, Kabbalistic tradition, she'adalet tagin, the 4 spikes, meramzin shekvar yeshnu ha'olam po hapam harevit, pam adaled. The 4 spikes on the Bet in the first word of the Torah is to teach you that we're in the 4th Shemitah. And the Bet, the large, a Bet agdola, the enlarged Bet, todienu she'agadol shebeyetzira hu nefesh ha'adam hasichli. And the Bet, the 2, is to indicate that civilized man, ha'adam hasichli, kvar yeshnu po pam Bet. It's the 2nd Shemitah for civilized man. And the 4th Shemitah overall. An amazing secret. And now this is where he's integrating Sefer HaTmunah. Remember, Sefer HaTmunah said we're in the 2nd Shemitah. So the Tiferes Yisrael is not arguing with that. He said, yeah, we are in the 2nd Shemitah of civilized man. And 4th Shemitah overall. And this is perfect because when we actually look at archaeological evidence of complex civilization, how far back does it go? It goes back to the end of the last ice age. It goes back about 12,000 years and not more, roughly 12,000 years. The earliest cities that we have are 11 to 12,000 years old. There's Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, very famous. Even in Jericho, there's a place today, it's called Tel Sultan, an archaeological site near Jericho in Israel. 12,000, also dated to about 11, 12,000 years. So the actual complex civilization evidence that we have, cities, buildings, large megastructures, goes back 12,000 years. Even ancient Egypt. We tend to think that the pyramids and the Sphinx, the official number they say is they're 4,500 years old. No. That's not quite right. Today, many scholars will tell you that they're about 12,000 years old. The Sphinx has clear erosion from rain. The Sphinx has been exposed to heavy rain. How? The past 6,000, 7,000 years, this area has been desert. There's no rain there. So how can it have so much water erosion from rain? We know that actually before 7,000 years ago, the Sahara was a rainforest. When the Sphinx was built, it was built within a rainforest. The Sphinx is 12,000 years old. And again, that fits perfectly with this. And it also fits perfectly with the cosmic cycle. Remember I said I'd come back to this. With the astrological cycle of 26,000 years. Because this is unbelievable. I mentioned this once before a few years ago. But remember what we said. We're in the age of Pisces. We're at the end of Pisces. Before that was Aries. Before that was Taurus. Before that was Gemini. Before that was Cancer. And before that was Leo. Do the math. It's 2,000 years per age. If you go back 6 times to Leo, that's 12,000 years ago. Meaning 12,000 years ago when the Sphinx was built, it was the age of Leo. The equinox was in Leo. And you have the Sphinx is a lion. You have this massive image of a lion at 12,000 years. And when it was built, the equinox was in Leo. It was the age of Leo. And not only that, but you've probably seen this before. The 3 pyramids in Giza are arranged. It's not random. They correspond to Orion's belt. And the 3 stars of Orion's belt, right? There's 3 stars in Orion's belt that are very bright in the night sky. You can see them very clearly most nights of the year. The pyramids are aligned to Orion's belt, but not the way it appears now. The way it appeared 12,000 years ago. So the pyramids were built in line with Orion's belt as it appeared then, in the age of Leo. which is incredible. And even better than that, you know what the Mesopotamians called Orion? According to them, the constellation was called Nephila. Nephila. It was associated with the Nephilim. So I want to talk about that next time, God willing. About the Anakim, the Anunnaki, and the Nephilim. We'll leave that for next time. And UFOs. Going to go deeper down the rabbit hole. But we see all this evidence that we have 12,000 years of human civilization. And that fits perfectly with this idea, with what the Tiferes Yisrael is saying. Because the current year is 5785. And he says this is the second civilized Shemitah, which means there were 7,000 years of civilization before. Do the math. The actual civilized year, the Hebrew year, is 12,785. Isn't that incredible? And it fits in to this Younger Dryas hypothesis. You've probably heard about this, like Graham Hancock talks about this a lot, and it's like on TV and on all these specials. The Younger Dryas period, which corresponds to the last ice age, it ended 12,000 years ago. The Earth was frozen until then, especially the northern hemisphere. And 12,000 years ago, for some reason that we don't know why, the ice started to melt, the Earth warmed up, the land started to flourish, and civilization exploded all over the planet. We don't know why. There's different theories for what exactly happened 12,000 years ago to end this age. And maybe we'll talk about it next time when we talk about the Anunnaki and the Anakim. Remember, the Torah speaks of Anakim and Nephilim. So you have 12,000 years of civilization, which fits perfectly with the Tiferes Yisrael. And by the way, today, I mentioned this before, there is a movement, there is something called, instead of counting the years like CE or AD, where in 2025 CE or AD, there's a whole other thing to count it as HE, in the Holocene era, or in the human era, in the era of civilization. And according to that, the year is 12,025. So this was first proposed in 1993 by somebody called Cesare Emiliani, and he said, why are we still counting by Common Era or AD? It doesn't mean anything to most of the world that's not Christian. It's not really scientifically meaningful. It's not even accurate according to Christianity, because, if you're dating from the birth of Jesus wasn't even born then anyways. So it's completely useless. So Emiliani proposed, let's actually start counting from the Holocene era, which is universal for all of mankind, in which case the year is not 2025, but it's 12,025. So there are people who actually count, who've made the case, various scientists and people who've made the case that we should switch to counting the Holocene era. We should be in 12,025. And that's perfect, because the Tiferes Yisrael said 200 years ago that we're in the year 12,785. We would be today in the year 12,785. So it actually fits really neatly.
Would it be relevant to Jews?
No, but he's saying not just relevant to Jews, he's saying all of civilization. He said, even according to the Hebrew calendar, this is the second go of the Hebrew calendar. So we're 7,000 plus 5785. And then he continues. He says, "Velefi aniyut da'ati," he says, according to my opinion, up till now he was saying the tradition he received, the Kabbalistic tradition he received. Now he's saying, in my opinion, she'otana bnei adam shayu be'olam hakadum shenikraim Promethean. He actually writes Promethean, Pei Reish Aleph Aleph Ayin Mem Yud Tet Ayin Nun. The Promethean man, right? The hominids or whoever, the people, the pre-civilized humans. Who are they? Abnei Adam shayu be'olam kodem briat Adam harishon. So before our Shemitah, before our 5785 from our Adam, there were already Promethean people in the previous Shmitot.
That's why we call the creation of Adam and then Ha-Adam.
Also, you can also look at, exactly, he doesn't say it like that, but you could also connect it to that. So there have been previous humans, but we're in the second Shemitah of civilized man. Beautiful. And then he says, "Habnei Adam shayu be'olam kodem briat Adam harishon, ach shui hen tatka'ad dorot shenizkeru b'Shabbat v'chagiga." In Masechet Shabbat and Chagiga, there's a statement that prior to Adam, there were 974 generations. You've seen this before? That there were 974 generations before Adam. Where does this come from? It comes from a verse in Tehillim, same verse, Davar tziva le'elef dor, that God commanded the Torah to the 1,000th generation. So the sages say, what do you mean to the 1,000th generation? Moses' generation was the 26th from Adam. From Adam to Noah is 10, from Noah to Abraham's 10, and then from Abraham to Moshe is 6 more generations after Abraham. That's 26. Moshe is the 26th generation from Adam. And 26 is God's name, right? The Gematria of Hashem. So how did the verse in Tehillim say God gave the Torah to the 1,000th? God commanded his word to the 1,000th generation. Must be, subtract 26, there must have been 974 generations before Adam. So Tiferes Yisrael says, in my opinion, that's what it's talking about. All those pre-humans in the previous Shmitot. Beautiful. Interestingly enough, if you do the math, if you say we had 3 previous Shmitot, which corresponds to 974 generations, so that's 21,000 years, right? We had 21,000 years prior to our current calendar, which would equal 974 generations. So if you do the math, divide 21,000 by 974, it gives you 21 and a half years per generation, which is just about right.
21 and a half?
Yeah, which is pretty good, because the time from when a person's born to when they are hit reproductive age, usually, especially for most of history, is about 21 and a half years.
So what is the 25 and the 40 come from?
There's different ways to count a generation.
20 years by 974, you're at already almost 20,000.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. 21,000 divided by 974 is 21 and a half.
We're only at 12,000 years.
No, there's 4. We're in the 4th Shemitah, right? So there were 3 Shmitot before of 21,000 years.
So you're counting Adam as a generation?
No. What I'm suggesting is that the first 2 Shmitot had uncivilized humans. And the last 2 Shmitot has civilized humans that are able to build megastructures and cities. So prior to 12,000 years ago, we do see evidence archaeologically of tools, of cave paintings, right? Like Lascaux in France, ancient cave paintings. That's even older. So what do you call that? So that's these even pre-civilized humans, with that they're not sichli, as the Tiferes Yisrael says, right? So we have 21,000 generations of humans 21,000 years of years of 974 generations. Okay? And it corresponds nicely, because if you do the math, it's 21 and a half years, which is about right on average, right? Today people get married later, but for most of history that was about right. And then he just explains, Ve'otam kavav dorot shechasru be'olam hakodem, there's 26 generations that were missing. The previous Shemitah ended 26 generations early. Chazru ve'ushlamu me'adam harishon ad Moshe Rabbeinu alav hashalom. Okay, these 26 were fulfilled at the start of this sabbatical. Remember, each one flows to the next, right? The souls of one flow into the next one. She'az nitbashel v'nizdakek ha'olam kvar yafeh yafeh she'yeh raui lekabalat ha'torah. Because now the world was ready for Torah, to actually receive the Torah. And that's why we say the verse, Me'olam ve'ad olam ata'el. From one world to the next world, you're still God. Right? From one Shemitah to the next Shemitah, it's the same God. And we also say, Baruch Hashem Elohei Israel, Me'ha'olam ve'ad olam. From one world to the next, it's the same God. So he said there's a lot more to say. I encourage you to read the whole Tiferes Yisrael. He talks about Tchiyat HaMetim. He says, like what the Rabbeinu Bechaya says, really, that this is what Tchiyat HaMetim is all about. We're getting into the resurrection for the Shemitah. He talks all about that and his view on Olam Haba. But just one more paragraph, just to finish with the Tiferes Yisrael. So he says, Ata achai niftachu lanu chalonot or yoter be'ikar hazeh. We've opened windows, very bright windows. Be'emunash kvar hayinu po. You should know, he says, we have now this illumination. Be'emunah kvar hayinu po kulanu. We've all been here before. It's the same souls being recycled in every Shemitah. We've all been here before. Hayinu po kulanu. In the previous world. And it's the same souls being reincarnated from one world to the next with a guf chadash, with a new body. Yoter mushlamim mi betchila. And more refined than before. ושוב יבוא עת שאחר שנשלים פעולות היום הקצוב בעולם הזה, and we'll come back again. Know that we'll come back again in the 5th Shemitah. We're in the 4th, and we're improving with each one, and we'll come back. נחזור שוב להתראות בעולם. We're going to keep coming back, יותר מושלמים. Better and better in each generation. Until Sof HaKafa Shvi'it, until the end of the 7th, Shehu HaYovel HaGadol, which is the Cosmic Jubilee, She'ashuvu Kol HaNitzatzot HaKadoshot LeHasiba HaRishona. Like Rabbeinu Bechaya said, everything's going to return to the first cause, to Hashem Yitbarach, Be'ashlama Yetira, V'zeo Tachlit Kol HaBriya. That's the end goal of all of creation. So the Tiferet Yisrael makes the most sense. I think it puts everything together with Sefer HaTmuna, with archaeology, with the cosmological evidence and the astrological cycles. It all works really clearly. And just to conclude, if we're in the fourth Shemitah, that means we're in the Shemitah of Netzach. Netzach, which makes sense, because Netzach is all about dominance and victory, and we see that, competition, persistence, diligence, hard work, we have all that. It's also the place of faith, as we said last time. It's the place of prophecy. Our Shemitah is very much can be described as a time of prophetic experiences, out-of-body experiences, faith, spiritual growth, trying to connect to the eternal. Remember, Netzach is the eternal. God is Netzach Yisrael, the eternal one. So our Shemitah is very much people on our journey, in each of our journeys, we're trying to connect to the eternal. It's an era of music. Remember, Netzach is rooted in music. It's an era of war, military conflict. All that's rooted in Netzach, and we very much see that this is the world that we live in. We're in a world of Netzach. We're in a world defined by music and war and faith and prophecy and the need for dominance. And also, remember, Netzach is the realm of electricity. Our Shemitah is where we've harnessed electricity, which past Shemitot didn't have. We are very much in the time of electricity, in the time of Netzach. So you can see the evolution. The Tiferet Yisrael says there's an evolution from one Shemitah to the next. Like Rabbeinu Bechaya said, it's a flow, it's a river. So we could say that the first Shemitah was a Shemitah of Chesed. There was no Torah. The Torah was not revealed. There were no rules. Mankind was not civilized. They were like animals. They were naked and unashamed. It was free, no rules, no judgment, no nothing. It's time of Chesed. The second Shemitah of fire. That's when, we start seeing man harnessing fire, making tools, developing further now, cave paintings, things like that. But a very difficult time. It would overlap with the Younger Dryas and the Ice Age, a time of very serious climate issues in the world, cold, frozen, not much food, time of Gvura, a time of very little. And then the third, that's the Younger Dryas part. And the third Shemitah, which is the first civilized one, that's Tiferet. Now you have truth. Now you have civilization. Now you have spirit. You have spiritual growth. So we start seeing religious structures. We start seeing cities, sphinxes, pyramids, tombs, mega structures. That's Tiferet. The third Shemitah. All these beautiful buildings. Tiferet is beauty, harmony. Tiferet is symmetry. You look at the pyramids, perfect example of perfect symmetry. And then the fourth is Netzach, which is where we are now, and when the Torah is revealed. The eternal word of God, also tied to Netzach, revealed for the first time. So we see the evolution. So what's next? The first Shemitah was water, the second was fire, the third was the spirit. Now we have the electricity. What's next? Earth. The next one is Hod. Hod is an era, God willing, of lehodot, of gratitude and acknowledgement, of people living in harmony and peace with each other, and majesty, glory, splendor. It's the time of light. In this Shemitah, we've harnessed electricity. What's next? We haven't been able to harness light just yet. I believe, this is my speculation and suggestion, that in the next Shemitah, we will learn how to harness light and light speed travel that we can't do yet, or faster than light travel, be able to traverse the galaxies, become an interstellar species. That's Hod. That's going to require Hod. It's going to require people to reunite and to work together. I think the next Shemitah will go even further and now have light. We'll be able to harness and manipulate light. Next, and then the Torah will therefore also be revealed. New dimensions of Torah will be revealed. Remember, Lag BaOmer is Hod Shebehod. The Torah secrets are light of light, Hod Shebehod. So the next Shemitah will have Torah on the next level and be able to manipulate light and use that. Think of the possible scientific wisdom. Maybe Torah and scientific wisdom will be indistinguishable at that point. In this Shemitah, we're struggling to find connections between Torah and science. We have to figure out how it's not inherently obvious. You have to kind of uncover. Maybe in the next Shemitah it will be obvious. And then the sixth Shemitah will be Yesod, which is, remember, it's earth and it's reproduction. Maybe that'll be the time when mankind becomes, again, my speculation, a truly interplanetary species and learns to reproduce life on other planets. Maybe we'll be able to seed life on other planets now. There's a theory called panspermia, that life on Earth was seeded from other planets. Right? So I want to leave that for next time when we talk about the Anunnaki and the UFOs, because that's a popular theory as well, that life here was put by other beings. What might the Torah say about that? Will we get to that point where we can then traverse the galaxy and seed other planets, terraform planets, turn them Earth-like? Remember, Yesod is Earth. We'll be able to transform planets to make them livable and seed life on those planets and become a really interplanetary species. Maybe. Who knows? And then the final one would be Malchut, which would be the final sabbatical, the Sabbath of Sabbaths. Could it be that it'll be an entire 7,000 years of Shabbat? It's possible, if the seventh is Shabbat. Or it could just be that that's when we finally master the whole universe. Every human becomes king, Malchut, total kingship, total mastery. And remember, Malchut is speech, Malchut Peh. Will we be able to finally harness the power of speech, the greatest power, because God used speech to create the world. How did God create the world? God said, let there be light. God said, and there was. The power of speech to create whole universes. Will we be able to manipulate those secrets? Who knows? Will we get to the point where we can create whole universes? Make wormholes, black holes, all kinds of, who knows what power we'll have at that point. All kinds of incredible technologies. Dyson spheres, if you've ever heard of Dyson spheres, look it up. Harnessing whole stars. Who knows?
So, obviously, a big challenge is the power to prevent self-destruction of our own civilization.
Yeah, and you're right, that there is a destruction, right? At the end of each Shemitah, there actually is a destruction, and we start again, and we do it better. So this time we mastered, in this Netzach Shemitah, we've mastered electricity. Next we master light. Then we master life. Then we master the whole power of creation itself. And then we've come to the end. After that, you can't go any further. And then you've hit your Cosmic Jubilee, and God says, okay, that's good. Start again. Start from zero. Go back to Tohu Vavohu and start again. And so for us now, in 5785 of the second, 785, but 5785 of the second Shemitah. So we're now approaching Shabbat. We're approaching our own final millennium. And we're very close to the end. There's a bit over 200 years left. And remember, you can bring in Shabbat early. So we're coming to that point. The whole idea of the end of days, according to this Cosmic Jubilee view, what is the point of the end of days? What is the point of Mashiach? It's all just a transition into the final Shabbat, to the Cosmic Shabbat, to that final 1,000 years of reward before we start the next Shemitah, and all these souls are kind of reincarnated and recycled. And the journey, our cosmic spiritual journey, continues, because we're all ultimately 50,000 years old. And it's all happened, remember, time, past, present, and future. It's all really simultaneous from God's perspective. And Moshe already saw it all. Moshe was shown all 49,000 years, past, present, future, but not the 50th. So we're all part of the same cosmic journey. We've all lived through everything in the past. We've lived through the Sphinx and Pyramids age. We've lived through the age of Leo and the Pisces and Aries and all of these things. We've lived through Chesed and Gvura and Tiferet, and now we're in Netzach, and the journey continues. So right now we're awaiting Mashiach, which is really just coming into our own Shabbat. We're in the middle of the cycle. And again, we can bring Shabbat early. So God willing, we'll merit to bring Shabbat early and have our Sabbath of delights soon. So we'll end with that.